A cold wind was blowing the clouds over a huge skyscraper in the center of New York City. On the top floor, in a spacious office with panoramic windows, stood William Goldsmith, a man whose name was a household name in the city's business community. His gaze was on the city below, but he saw only numbers and graphs. The office door opened abruptly, and a young woman entered the room with a folder in her hands. William didn't even turn around. "Mr. Goldsmith, the reports you asked for," she said, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. William slowly turned around, his cold gray eyes looking at his assistant appraisingly. "You're 2 minutes late, Miss Parker," he said in a flat tone. "You know that I do not tolerate negligence." Miss Parker turned pale. "I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." "Of course it won't," William replied, taking the file. "You are dismissed. Pack your things and leave the building for the rest of the day." "But, Mr. Goldsmith, I have a mortgage. I can't." William held up a hand, cutting her off. "Your personal problems don't interest me. You should have thought of that before you demonstrated your incompetence. Goodbye, Miss Parker." The woman left the office, barely holding back her sobs. William didn't even look after her, returning to studying the reports. An hour later, Richard Stone, the company's CFO, came into the office. "William, do you have a minute?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Goldsmith nodded without looking up from his papers. "Go ahead." "The thing is," Richard cleared his throat, "our project to build a new residential complex. There have been some problems." William finally looked up. "What kind of problems?" "It turns out that the land we plan to build on belongs to a local orphanage. They refuse to sell." William stood up abruptly. "An orphanage? Are you saying that some orphans are standing in the way of our multi-million-dollar project?" Richard nodded nervously. "Yes, they say it's the only place where children can play." "I don't care about their games," William interrupted. "Find a way to buy this land. Offer them money, lots of money. If they refuse, find some dirt on them. There's always something wrong with these places." "But these are children, William," Richard tried to argue. "Couldn't we find another place to build?" William looked at him with icy contempt. "Children? These orphans are a burden to society. They will never achieve anything in life, and our project will bring jobs and profit to the city. Don't be sentimental, Richard. Business is war, and we must win at all costs." Richard sighed, realizing that it was useless to argue. "Okay, I'll do my best." "Not possible, but impossible," William cut him off. "I want to see results by the end of the week." When Richard left, William turned to the window. His gaze slid across the city below, stopping at a small park nearby. "This is a pointless charity," he muttered. "These people will never learn." He thought back to a recent charity event he had attended just to keep the company's image up. There he met a woman who asked him for help. Her husband had died, leaving her with 2 children and a pile of debt. "Mr. Goldsmith," she pleaded, "your company is our only chance. If you postpone the loan payment for just a few months, we can get back on our feet." William remembered how coldly he had answered her. "Mrs. Thompson, your problems are your problems. My company is not a charity. If you can't repay your loan, we'll have to confiscate your property. This is business, nothing personal." The woman left, sobbing, and William didn't even feel remorse. He was used to such scenes. Returning to his desk, William noticed an invitation to another charity event. This time they were raising money for a children's cancer center. "They're wasting money again," he muttered, throwing the invitation into the wastebasket. "These children are doomed anyway. It would be better to invest this money in something useful." William sat down at his desk and threw himself into his work. He didn't know that soon his life would change dramatically, and the very people he despised would become his only chance for salvation. Cold autumn rain was pounding on the windows of a small house on the outskirts of the city. Inside, in the dimly lit kitchen, Rebecca Foster sat holding a cup of long cold tea. Her eyes were staring at nothing, her thoughts wandering far away. "Mom?" A soft voice broke her out of her reverie. Rebecca turned and saw her 10-year-old daughter Emma standing in the kitchen doorway. "Yes, sweetie," she answered, trying to make her voice sound cheerful. "When is Daddy coming home?" Emma asked, her big brown eyes full of hope. Rebecca felt her heart clench with pain. How do you explain to a child that her dad is never coming back? "Emma, honey," she began, trying to hold back her tears. "Remember when we talked about how he's in heaven now?" Emma frowned. "But he promised to come back. He never lied." Rebecca stood up and hugged her daughter. "Your daddy loved us so much, sweetheart. He would never have left us of his own accord. But sometimes things happen that we can't control." At that moment, crying came from the next room. Rebecca sighed. "It's your brother waking up. Please go look after him while I make him some milk." Emma nodded and went into the room where her 3-year-old brother Michael was lying in a small crib. Rebecca went back to the kitchen table and picked up the envelope that was lying there. She already knew its contents by heart, but she read it again anyway. "Dear Mrs. Foster, it is with deep regret that we inform you that your husband, John Foster, was killed in the line of duty. The accident occurred at the construction site of the new Golden Heights residential complex." Then came the dry formalities of compensation and condolences. Rebecca put the letter down and covered her face with her hands. How would she cope on her own? John was the only breadwinner in the family. She quit her job 3 years ago when Michael was born, and now— The doorbell rang, snapping her out of her gloomy thoughts. Rebecca wiped her eyes and went to answer it. A man in a business suit stood on the threshold, holding an umbrella. "Mrs. Foster?" he asked. "My name is Anthony Green. I represent Goldsmith Industries." Rebecca tensed. This was the company that John had died on the construction site. "What do you want?" she asked coldly. Anthony shifted from one foot to the other in embarrassment. We'd like to discuss compensation for your husband's death." "Compensation?" Rebecca felt anger rising in her. "You think you can just come in here and offer money to make things right?" "Mrs. Foster, I understand how you feel, but—" "No, you don't understand anything," Rebecca interrupted him. "My husband died because of your company's negligence. Money will not bring him back to my children." Anthony sighed. "I know it's hard, but the reality is that you need this money. You have children, a mortgage." Rebecca froze. "How do you know about our mortgage?" Anthony looked away. "It's part of our investigation. Look, we're willing to offer you a fair settlement, but there is one condition." "What condition?" Rebecca asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. "You must sign a document releasing our company from any responsibility for your husband's death." Rebecca felt the ground slipping away from under her feet. "You want me to sell my husband's memory?" Anthony shrugged his shoulders. "It's standard procedure, Mrs. Foster. Think of your children. This money will provide for their future." Rebecca shook her head. "Get out. Get out of my house right now." As the door slammed behind Anthony, Rebecca slid down the wall to the floor, feeling tears streaming down her cheeks. How could she agree to this? But how could she refuse, knowing that without this money they could lose their home? The next few days flew by in a blur. Rebecca tried to find a job but was turned down everywhere, citing her long career break and lack of experience. The bills kept coming, and the money was running out. One evening, after the kids were in bed, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table looking at the pile of unpaid bills. Her eyes landed on a newspaper article she had accidentally seen in the morning. "Billionaire William Goldsmith launches new charity." The article talked about how Goldsmith, the owner of Goldsmith Industries, had started a new foundation to help low-income families. Rebecca felt her breath catch in her throat. This was her chance. The next day, she stood in front of the huge Goldsmith Industries building, holding a letter of appeal. She knew the chances were slim, but it was her last hope. When Rebecca finally got to William Goldsmith's reception desk, she felt her resolve waver. The man behind the desk radiated coldness and indifference. "I don't have much time, Mrs. Foster," Goldsmith said, not even looking at her. "What do you want?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "Mr. Goldsmith, I am the widow of John Foster. He died on a construction site for your company 3 months ago. I've come to ask for your help." Goldsmith finally looked up at her. "Oh yes, I remember that incident. You were offered compensation, weren't you?" "Yes, but," Rebecca stuttered, "they demanded that I sign a document releasing your company from liability. I can't do that. It would be a betrayal of my husband's memory." Goldsmith sighed. "Mrs. Foster, business is business. We can't risk lawsuits. If you're not willing to accept our terms, I can't help you." Rebecca felt tears welling up in her eyes. "But your charity, I thought—" "My foundation doesn't deal with personal cases," Goldsmith interrupted her. "It's about systemic change, not about helping individuals. If you can't cope with your financial difficulties, maybe you should turn to social services." Rebecca could not believe her ears. "You don't even feel guilty? My husband died working for you." Goldsmith looked at her coldly. "Your husband knew the risks of his job. We can't be responsible for every accident. You have a choice, Mrs. Foster. Accept our offer or seek help elsewhere. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an important meeting." Rebecca walked out of the office, barely able to stand. She felt broken and humiliated. How could people be so cruel? When she got home, Rebecca found another letter in her mailbox. It was a notice that the bank was starting foreclosure proceedings against their home for non-payment of the mortgage. She sat down on the front steps, feeling the last vestiges of hope leaving her. What now? How would she explain to her children that they could lose their home? At that moment, Emma ran out of the house holding a drawing. "Mom, look, I drew our family. There's you, me, Michael, and Daddy in heaven." Rebecca hugged her daughter, feeling tears streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't give up. For the sake of her children, she had to find a way, even if it meant fighting the richest man in town. The autumn sun was slowly setting over the horizon, painting the New York sky in shades of red and gold. The annual Hearts of Hope Charity Ball was about to begin on the top floor of the luxurious Empire Hotel. The city's elite gathered here to demonstrate their generosity and social responsibility. Rebecca Foster nervously adjusted the dress she had borrowed from her neighbor. She felt out of place among the glitter of diamonds and the rustle of expensive fabrics. But she knew this was her chance, perhaps her last, to save her family. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Lisa, her neighbor and only friend who had agreed to accompany her for the evening. Rebecca nodded. "I have no choice, Lisa. If I don't find a way to pay the bills, we're going to lose the house. I can't let the kids end up on the street." Lisa sighed. "I understand. But these people, they live in a different world. They can't possibly understand your situation. I have to try." They entered a huge hall where several hundred guests had already gathered. The waiters deftly maneuvered between groups of people, offering champagne and gourmet hors d'oeuvre. On the stage, an orchestra played light classical music. Rebecca looked around the room, searching for a familiar face. And suddenly, she saw him, William Goldsmith, standing in the center of a group of businessmen, discussing something animatedly. "It's him," she whispered to Lisa. "I have to talk to him." Lisa grabbed her arm. "Rebecca, be careful. Don't forget who he is." Rebecca took a deep breath and walked toward the group of businessmen. She could feel her heart beating furiously in her chest. When she got closer, Goldsmith was just finishing telling a joke, and everyone around him was laughing. "Mr. Goldsmith?" Rebecca said quietly. William turned, his eyes narrowing for a moment as if he was trying to remember who she was. "Yes? How can I help you?" he asked politely, but there was a hint of irritation in his voice. "I'm Rebecca Foster. We met at your office a few weeks ago. I'm a widow—" "Oh, yes," Goldsmith interrupted her. "Mrs. Foster. I remember our conversation. But as I said, I can't help you." Rebecca felt her cheeks burning. "Mr. Goldsmith, please, I know you've started a new charity. I'm just asking you to consider my situation. My children." Goldsmith held up a hand, stopping her. "Mrs. Foster, this is a charity event. People are here to relax and do a good deed, not to hear personal stories. If you have a formal request, please send it through my office." "But I've already tried." The desperation in Rebecca's voice caught the attention of the other guests. "Your staff won't even give me the opportunity to meet with you. I'm begging you, at least listen to me." Goldsmith made a sign to the security guard, who instantly appeared next to him. "Please escort Mrs. Foster to the exit. She seems to have had a little too much to drink." "What? No." Rebecca tried to break free of the guard's grip. "I haven't even been drinking." "Mr. Goldsmith, you can't do this. My husband died working for you." Her words attracted the attention of everyone around her. People began to whisper, casting curious glances at Goldsmith. William stepped closer to Rebecca, his eyes blazing with anger. "Listen to me carefully, Mrs. Foster," he said quietly, but clearly. "Your husband was one of thousands of employees of my company. His death is a tragedy, but it is not my personal responsibility. We have offered you compensation, which you have refused to accept. That is your choice. But don't you dare come in here and blame me in front of my guests and partners." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "How can you be so cruel? You have billions and my children could be on the street." Goldsmith shrugged his shoulders. "Life is unfair, Mrs. Foster. I started from nothing and achieved everything on my own. No one helped me when things were hard." "Why should I help you?" "Because you can," Rebecca exclaimed. "Because it's the right thing to do." Goldsmith laughed. "The right thing? There is no right or wrong in business. There is only profit and loss. And you, Mrs. Foster, are now causing me a loss by ruining this evening." He nodded to the guard. "Take her out, and make sure she never comes to any of my events again." The guard led Rebecca to the exit. She looked around for support in the crowd but saw only indifferent or confused faces. No one dared to stand up for her. As they approached the door, Rebecca saw Lisa waiting for her with a look of horror on her face. "Oh my God, Rebecca, what happened?" she asked, hugging her friend. Rebecca could not answer. She just burst into tears, feeling the last vestiges of hope leaving her. They went outside, where the cold wind seemed to mock their thin dresses. "Let's go home," Lisa said quietly, supporting her friend. Rebecca nodded, unable to say a word. She felt humiliated and broken. How could she have been so naive? How could she have believed that these rich people really cared about people like her? When they got into the taxi, Rebecca finally found the strength to speak. "What am I going to tell the kids, Lisa? How do I explain to them that we could lose our home?" Lisa squeezed her hand. "We'll think of something, Rebecca. You're not alone. I'll help you, I promise." But Rebecca could barely hear her. Before her eyes stood the cold, indifferent face of William Goldsmith. How could a man be so cruel? How can someone who has so much deny those who have lost everything? As they drove up to Rebecca's house, she saw a light in the windows. Mrs. Johnson, the elderly neighbor who had agreed to watch the children, must be still awake. "Thanks for being with me today," Rebecca said to Lisa as she got out of the taxi. "Don't thank me," Lisa replied. "We're friends, and we'll get through this together, I promise." Rebecca nodded, feeling grateful to have at least one person she could count on. As she entered the house, she saw Mrs. Johnson sitting in a chair with a book. "Oh, you're back," the old lady said, getting up. "The children are long asleep. How was your evening?" Rebecca tried to smile, but all she got was a grimace. "Not very well, Mrs. Johnson, but thanks for watching the kids." When the neighbor left, Rebecca quietly went to the children's room. Emma and Michael were sleeping, their faces so calm and serene. Rebecca felt her heart clench with pain. How could she let them down? How could she let them lose their home, their childhood? She returned to the living room and sat down on the couch, feeling completely helpless. There was an envelope on the table, another notice from the bank about a late payment. Rebecca knew that time was running out. If she didn't find a way to pay the debt, they would lose the house. And then, looking at the photo of her husband, Rebecca felt something new awaken inside her. It wasn't just anger or despair. It was determination. Determination to fight to the end, to not give up, no matter what. She went to the computer and turned it on. If William Goldsmith thinks he can just brush her off, he's very wrong. She will find a way to make him listen. She will tell her story to the world. And if that means fighting the richest man in town, so be it. For the sake of her children, for the sake of John's memory, she would do anything. Rebecca began to write. Her fingers ran quickly across the keyboard. She poured her entire story, all her pain and anger onto the screen. She didn't know if anyone would read it, if it would change anything. But she knew one thing. She would not be silent anymore. The sun was barely breaking through the heavy clouds hanging over New York City. William Goldsmith stood at the panoramic window of his office, looking out over the city below. His mind was far from the bustle of the city as he contemplated his new project, the Golden Heights residential complex, which was to become his most ambitious achievement yet. The office door opened abruptly, and Richard Stone, the company's chief financial officer, entered the room. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "William, we're in trouble," he breathed out. Goldsmith turned around slowly. "What's wrong, Richard? Problems with the building permits again." Richard shook his head. "Worse, much worse. There's been an accident at the Golden Heights construction site. One of the sections collapsed." William tensed. "So, no one was hurt, I hope?" "5 workers were killed," Richard answered quietly. "And that's not all." Goldsmith felt a chill run down his spine. "What else?" "Your cousin, Alex, is among the dead." William froze. Alex, the same Alex he hadn't seen in 15 years. "That's impossible," he whispered. Alex couldn't be working on a construction site. He was a successful architect. Richard sighed. It turns out that in recent years he had been having financial difficulties. He got a job at a construction site a few months ago using a different name. Probably didn't want you to know. William felt the ground slipping away from under his feet. He sank into his chair, trying to comprehend what he was hearing. "Did he have a family?" he finally asked. Richard nodded. "His wife died 2 years ago. There are 2 children left, a boy and a girl. They are 8 and 12 years old." William closed his eyes. Children, orphans, like the woman, Rebecca Foster, who had come to see him a few weeks ago. He remembered how coldly he had turned her away, how he had kicked her out of the charity event. And now he found himself in a similar situation. "What will happen to the children?" he asked, his voice trembling. Richard looked at him in surprise. "Well, considering that you are their closest relative." William stood up abruptly. No, that's impossible. I cannot take responsibility for children. I don't have the time. I don't have the experience. I don't know how to be a father." "William," Richard said gently, "you may not have a choice. You are their only living relative. If you refuse, they will end up in the foster care system." Goldsmith felt panic grip him. Children in his home? Children he knew nothing about? Children of his long-forgotten cousin? "There must be another way," he said, pacing nervously around the office. "Maybe we can find them a good family. I'll pay whatever it takes." Richard shook his head. It's not that simple, William, and there's something else. What else? Goldsmith asked tiredly. The press has already learned about the accident, and that a relative of yours was among the dead. They're waiting for your reaction. William felt anger rising in him. Damn it! William, Richard said carefully, you have to understand what this looks like. A rich businessman whose relative died on his own construction site. People are waiting for your reaction, and your decision about the children. Goldsmith sank into his chair, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. He remembered his own words to Rebecca Foster. Life is not fair. Now those words sounded like bitter irony. What should I do, Richard? He asked quietly, feeling completely helpless for the first time in years. Richard came closer and put his hand on his shoulder. You have to make a decision, William, and make it fast. The press is waiting. The shareholders are nervous. And there are the children. They just lost their father. They need someone. William stood up and walked to the window. The city below continued to live its life, unaware of the drama unfolding high above. All right, he said at last. Organize a press conference for tomorrow. I'll take custody of the children. Temporarily, he quickly added, until we find a better solution. Richard nodded. I'll organize it. William, you're doing the right thing. Goldsmith just nodded grimly. When Richard left, he turned back to the window. His gaze rested on the Golden Heights construction site in the distance. What should have been his greatest triumph had turned into the worst tragedy of his life. He remembered Alex as he had been as a child, a cheerful, carefree boy who had always dreamed of becoming an architect. How could it be that their paths had diverged so completely? And how could he, William, not know that his cousin was in such a predicament? Goldsmith's thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. It was his personal assistant. Mr. Goldsmith, she said, social services has brought the children. They are waiting in the living room. William felt his heart skip a beat. So soon? He wasn't ready. He didn't know what to say, how to behave. Okay, he said, trying to make his voice sound confident. I'll be right down. He left the office and headed for the elevator. Each step was difficult for him. What would he say to these children? How will he explain to them that their father died on his construction site? And how the hell was he going to take care of them? When the elevator doors opened on the first floor, William stood still for a moment. Then, taking a deep breath, he stepped into the living room. There, on the couch, were two children. A boy, about 8 years old, held his older sister's hand tightly. Their faces were pale and frightened. William felt something tighten in his chest. These children, so small and defenseless, now depended on him, on a man who had spent his entire life thinking only about money and success. Hello, he said quietly, coming closer. I'm William. I'm your uncle. The children looked at him in silence. In their eyes he saw fear, distrust, and hope. And in that moment, William Goldsmith realized that his life had changed forever. Whether he wanted it or not, he was now responsible for these two little souls, and for the first time in years he felt something akin to fear. But looking into the eyes of these children, William felt that he had no choice. He had to try. For their sake, for the sake of Alex's memory, and perhaps for his own. Welcome home, he said, extending his hand to the children. Though his voice was shaking, for the first time in a long time, it had a touch of real warmth. William Goldsmith stood in front of the mirror in his luxurious penthouse, adjusting his tie. His reflection looked tired and tense. It had been 3 days since he had taken custody of his late cousin's children, Emily and Michael. What am I doing? He thought as he ran his hand through his graying hair. These 3 days seemed to be the longest of his life. The children were quiet and withdrawn, hardly speaking to him, and he didn't know how to communicate with them. The bedroom door opened quietly, and Martha, the housekeeper he had hired specifically to take care of the children, entered the room. "Mr. Goldsmith, breakfast is ready," she said. "The children are already at the table." William nodded. "Thank you, Martha. I'll be right down." As the housekeeper left, he took a deep breath, preparing for another awkward breakfast. As he walked down the stairs, he could hear the quiet voices of the children, who immediately fell silent as he entered the dining room. "Good morning," he said, trying to make his voice sound cheerful. "Good morning, Uncle William," the children answered quietly in unison. William sat down at the table and picked up the newspaper. He tried to concentrate on the financial news, but his eyes kept coming back to the children. Emily, the eldest, was carefully cutting her pancake into small pieces. Michael just stared at his plate, not touching his food. "Do you like breakfast?" William asked, trying to start a conversation. Emily nodded. "Yes, Uncle William. Thank you." Silence reigned again. William could feel the tension building. He was not used to this kind of atmosphere in his own home. "Listen," he suddenly said, putting down the newspaper. "I realize that this is all very difficult for you. For me, too, but we must somehow adapt to each other." The children looked at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "What do you like to do?" William asked. "Do you have any hobbies, games?" Emily answered carefully. "I like to draw, and Michael, he likes Lego." William nodded, trying to look interested. "That's good. Perhaps we could buy you some new paints and a set?" Michael suddenly looked up. "How long are we going to stay here?" The question took William by surprise. He didn't know what to say. "William, I don't know, Michael. This is your home for now." "But you don't want us," Emily said quietly. "We heard you on the phone yesterday. You're looking for somewhere to send us." William felt the blood drain from his face. He had indeed spoken to his lawyer about the possibility of placing the children with another family, but he didn't think they would hear it. "Look," he said, trying to find the right words, "this is a difficult situation for all of us. I just want to make sure that you get the best." "The best is not to be with you?" Emily interrupted him, her eyes filled with tears. William felt something tighten in his chest. He had never thought that a child's words could have such an impact on him. "No, I didn't mean it," he said, trying to make amends. I don't know how to be a father. I'm afraid I'm going to do something wrong." Michael looked at him with his big blue eyes. "Our dad didn't know what to do sometimes either, but he always tried." These words struck William to the core. He remembered Alex as he had been as a child, always willing to try something new, even if he wasn't sure of the outcome. "You're right," he finally said. "I should at least try. I promise I won't talk about sending you away again. We'll try to figure this out together." Emily and Michael exchanged glances and then smiled weakly. It was the first smile William had seen on their faces in days. Suddenly his phone rang. It was Richard. "Excuse me, I have to take this," William told the children and went out into the hallway. "William, we're in trouble," Richard said as soon as he picked up the phone. "The shareholders are nervous. They think you've gotten too caught up in this family drama and forgotten about the business. They want a meeting." William felt the tension return. "Okay, tell them I'll be there in an hour." When he returned to the dining room, he saw that the children had already finished breakfast and were waiting for him. "I have to go to work," he said. "Martha will be with you if you need anything." "We understand," Emily interrupted him. "You're a busy man. Don't worry about us." William felt a stab of guilt. He was leaving them again, as he had done every day since they had arrived at his house. "I'll try to be back early," he said. "Maybe we could watch a movie together tonight?" The children exchanged glances again and then nodded. As William left the house and got into his luxury car, he felt a strange urge to go back. But his duties called, and he drove to the office, trying to focus on the upcoming meeting with shareholders. The meeting turned out to be tense. The shareholders were unhappy with the company's stock price drop after the construction accident and the negative press surrounding the children's story. "William, we understand your situation," said one of them, "but the company can't suffer because of your personal problems." "These are not personal problems," William replied more sharply than he intended. "These are the children of my dead relative, children who died on our construction site. And we all sympathize," another shareholder interjected. "But maybe it would be better if you found another family for them. Professionals who know how to care for traumatized children." William felt anger rising in him. A week ago he might have said something like that himself. But now, "No," he said firmly. "These children are my responsibility, and I will not abandon them just because it is inconvenient for business." Everyone in the room looked at him in surprise. William Goldsmith, who had always put business first, was suddenly talking about his responsibility to his children. "But William," another shareholder began, "think about the company." "I am thinking about the company," William interrupted. "And I think we have a chance to show the world that Goldsmith Industries is not just a soulless corporation. We can show that we care about people, about the families of our employees." He didn't believe he was saying it himself, but with every word he said, he felt something changing inside him. "I propose to create a support fund for families affected by the accident, and not only for them, for all our employees who find themselves in difficult life situations." The room fell silent. The shareholders looked at William as if they were seeing him for the first time. "It's an interesting idea," one of them finally said. "But it will cost the company." "It's an investment," William said firmly. "An investment in our people and in our reputation. And I will personally invest a significant amount in this fund." When the meeting was over, Richard approached William. "That was unexpected," he said. "But, I think this could work." William nodded, feeling strangely relieved. "I hope so too, Richard. And I think I should get back home. I have an important meeting tonight." "A meeting?" Richard asked in surprise. "I didn't see it on your schedule." William smiled weakly. "It's not a business meeting. I promised the kids that we would watch a movie together." And with that, he left the office, feeling something inside him begin to change. Perhaps this unwanted responsibility was exactly what he needed all his life. William Goldsmith sat in his office looking at an old photograph. It showed two boys, himself and his cousin Alex. They were smiling, holding each other's shoulders. It was taken the day their parents took them to a baseball game for the first time. A knock on the door broke him out of his reverie. "Come in," he said, quickly hiding the photo in his desk drawer. Emily, the oldest of Alex's children, entered the office. She looked uncertain, as if she didn't know if she had a right to be here. "Uncle William," she began quietly, "I wanted to ask you." William felt himself tense. He was still not used to these conversations with children. "Yes, Emily." "What is it?" "I found this picture in Dad's things," she said, handing him the picture. "It's of you and him, isn't it?" William took the photo and felt something tighten in his chest. It was the same day at the baseball game, but the picture was different. Alex was holding little William on his shoulders, both of them laughing. "Yes," he said after a pause. "That's your father and me." "You look so happy," Emily said. "Dad used to talk about you a lot. He said you were like brothers." William felt guilt wash over him. Like brothers? And he didn't even know that Alex was in such a bad way that he had to work on a construction site. We were close as children," he finally said. "Why did you stop talking to each other?" Emily asked. This question took William by surprise. He didn't know the exact answer himself. It was just that life had taken them apart. He went into business. Alex chose the creative path. And then there was simply no time left for old connections. "Sometimes it happens, Emily," he answered evasively. "Grown-ups, They get caught up in their own business, forgetting what's important. Emily looked at him with her penetrating eyes. Dad never forgot about you. He always said you would achieve great things. William felt something breaking inside him. Alex believed in him, and he didn't even know what was going on in his cousin's life. Emily, he began, trying to find the right words. I'm sorry I wasn't there for your father these past years. I was too busy with my own affairs, my business. Like now? The girl suddenly asked. You're always busy too. You're hardly ever home. These words hit William like a slap in the face. He suddenly saw himself through the eyes of this child, a cold, distant uncle who was more concerned with his business than with the children who had lost their father. You're right, he said after a long pause. I am trying to change, Emily. It's just not that easy. Dad used to say that family was the most important thing, the girl said quietly. He always made time for us, even when he was very busy. William felt tears coming to his eyes. He remembered how Alex had always protected him as a child, always been there for him. And what about him? What did he do for his brother? Emily, he said, getting up from the table and approaching the girl, I promise I'll try to be better. For you and Michael. I know I can't replace your father, but I'll try to be a good uncle. Emily looked at him hopefully. Really? You will spend more time with us? William nodded. Yes. And you know what? Let's start right now. What would you like to do tonight? The little girl's eyes shone. Maybe we could look at some old family albums. Could you tell us about Daddy, what he was like when he was a kid? William felt something warm spread through his chest. That's a great idea, Emily. Let's do that. That evening, as he sat on the couch with Emily and Michael, looking at old photos, William felt like part of a family for the first time in years. He told the children about their father, about their adventures together, and with each story he seemed to return to that carefree childhood. And somewhere deep inside, he realized that these children, whom he had initially considered a burden, had actually given him a chance to return to the person he once was, to the boy who believed in friendship, family, and love. The sun was barely breaking through the heavy curtains in William Goldsmith's office. He was sitting at his massive desk, looking through reports on the company's latest financial performance. The numbers were not encouraging. After the construction accident and the scandal over his sudden custody of Alex's children, Goldsmith Industries' stock was plummeting. Suddenly, the office door burst open and Richard Stone, his CFO, burst into the room. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with undisguised fear. William, we're in trouble, he exhaled. Big problems. Goldsmith looked up from his papers. What's wrong, Richard? Something with the new project. Richard shook his head. Worse. Much worse. I think someone is trying to pull off a hostile takeover of the company. William felt a chill run down his spine. What? Who? We don't know for sure yet, Richard replied, handing him the file. But someone is buying up our shares through shell companies, and it looks like it's not just speculation on the falling price. William quickly looked through the documents. With each page, his face grew more and more gloomy. This is impossible, he muttered. They used a sophisticated system of offshore companies, Richard explained. We only noticed it now that they've acquired almost 15% of the shares. William leaned back, trying to comprehend the situation. In all the years he's been running the company, no one has even dared to make a move like this. Do we have any idea who is behind this? He asked. Richard hesitated. There is one theory, but you're not going to like it. Go ahead, William said sharply. We think it might be Robert Kingsley. William felt anger rise in him. Robert Kingsley, his old rival and personal enemy. The man he had once beaten in a big deal, leaving him with nothing. Damn Kingsley, William hissed. He's always wanted revenge. And it looks like he's decided now is the time, Richard added. With all our problems. William stood up abruptly. We won't let him do this. Call an emergency board meeting and get in touch with our lawyers. We need a defense plan. When Richard left, William went to the window. New York City was bustling below, unaware of the drama unfolding at the top of one of its largest skyscrapers. Suddenly, his personal phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Goldsmith here," he said, picking up the phone. "Hello, William," a familiar voice said. It had been a long time since we had spoken. William felt his fists clench involuntarily. "Kingsley, I should have known you'd call for a laugh." Robert Kingsley laughed. "Oh, I'm not laughing, William, at least not yet, but soon I'm sure I'll have plenty to laugh about." "What do you want?" William asked sharply. "What has always been mine," Kingsley replied. "Your company and your humiliation." William felt anger boiling up inside him. "You will never have Goldsmith Industries. I will fight to the bitter end." "Oh, I'm counting on it," Kingsley said. "It will be much more interesting to watch you fall from the top. By the way, how are your new wards? Children, I believe." William froze. "Don't you dare touch them." "Me?" Kingsley asked innocently. "I won't lay a finger on them. But you know the press is so insatiable. They always want new sensations. I wonder what they'd think if they found out about some of the darker parts of your past." "You have nothing on me," William said. "Are you sure?" Kingsley asked gently. "Think carefully, William. Everyone has skeletons in their closet, and I'm very good at finding them." With that, he hung up, leaving William alone with his thoughts and fears. The whole day passed in a blur. An emergency meeting, meetings with lawyers, endless phone calls. William felt the ground slipping away from under his feet. Everything he had built over the years could crumble in a matter of days. When he finally returned home late at night, the house was quiet. The children were already asleep. William walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and sat down at the table feeling completely exhausted. "Uncle William?" A soft voice made him flinch. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing pajamas and holding a teddy bear. "Emily, why are you awake?" he asked, trying to make his voice sound cheerful. "I heard you come in," the girl answered. "You look very tired." William smiled weakly. "Just a hard day at work, nothing to worry about." Emily came closer. "Dad always said that when he was having a hard time he would think of Michael and me, and it gave him strength." William felt something tighten in his chest. He remembered his conversation with Kingsley, his threats. How could he protect these children if he couldn't even protect his own company? "Emily," he began carefully, if something bad happens and I have to go away for a while—" "You want to leave us?" The girl interrupted him. Her eyes filled with fear. "No," William answered quickly. "No, of course not. I want you to know that I will always care for you even if I'm not around." Emily walked over to him and suddenly hugged him. "Michael and I will take care of you too, Uncle William. We are family, aren't we?" William felt tears coming to his eyes. He hugged the girl back. "Yes, Emily, we are a family." When Emily went to bed, William sat in the kitchen for a long time, looking out the window at the city at night. He remembered his past, all the compromises and questionable decisions he had made on his way to the top. Could Kingsley really find something? And if so, is he willing to risk it all, his reputation, his company, the future of these children, in order to hold on to power? The next morning, William woke up with a clear understanding of what he needed to do. He called Richard before breakfast. "Richard, call an emergency press conference. Today at 2 o'clock. "A press conference?" Richard asked in surprise. "William, are you sure? We don't have a strategy ready." "I know what I'm doing," William interrupted. "Just get everything organized." Before leaving for the office, he went to the children's room. Emily and Michael were still asleep. William quietly walked over to their beds and stared at their calm faces for a few minutes. "I will not let you down," he thought. No matter what happens, I will protect you." At 2 o'clock, William Goldsmith stood in front of an army of journalists, cameras, and microphones. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I have called this press conference to make an important announcement. The last few weeks have been difficult for Goldsmith Industries and for me personally. The accident at our construction site, the death of my cousin, and the guardianship of his children have all forced me to reevaluate many things in my life and in the way I do business." He paused, looking around the room. Everyone in the room waited with bated breath for him to continue. "I realized that, in the pursuit of profit and success, I often forgot about the most important thing: people. About the employees of our company, about their families, about the community in which we work. Today I would like to announce the creation of a fund to support the families of our employees, which will be financed from my personal funds." There were whispers of surprise in the room. "Moreover," William continued, "I want to be completely honest with you and with the public. Yes, in the past I have made decisions I am not proud of. I have put profit before ethics. But today I am ready to take full responsibility for these mistakes and correct them." With these words, he took out a folder of documents. "Here is a full report on all the dubious transactions that our company has conducted over the past 10 years. I'm handing these documents over to law enforcement officials for a full and transparent investigation." The room erupted in laughter. Journalists jumped out of their seats to ask questions. "I realize that this decision may cost me my position as CEO and even control of the company," William said, shouting over the noise. "But I believe it's the right thing to do, for the company, for our employees, and for me personally." When he finished his speech and left the stage, Richard ran up to him, his face white with shock. "William, what have you done? Do you realize that this is the end?" William looked at his old colleague calmly. "No, Richard. This is a new beginning." Returning home that evening, William felt strangely relieved. He knew that hard times were ahead, an investigation, maybe even a trial. He could lose everything he had built over the years, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had done the right thing. As he entered the house, Emily and Michael ran out of the living room. "Uncle William," they exclaimed in unison, "we saw you on TV." William froze. "And what do you think?" Emily looked at him with her serious eyes. "Dad always said that it was important to admit your mistakes and correct them." Chapter 8. Children at Risk. A month has passed since William Goldsmith's high-profile press conference. Life has changed dramatically. Investigations into Goldsmith Industries were in full swing, the company's stock continued to fall, and William himself was temporarily suspended from the board. However, despite all these problems, William felt strangely relieved. For the first time in many years, he could sleep well without fear that his secrets might come out, and most importantly, he finally had time for Emily and Michael. That morning, William was preparing breakfast when a sleepy Emily walked into the kitchen. "Good morning, Uncle William," she said, yawning. "Good morning, sweetheart," William replied with a smile. "How did you sleep?" "Good," Emily said, sitting down at the table. "Where's Michael?" "Still sleeping. You know how much of a sleeper he is." They laughed together. They had become much closer that month, almost like a real family. Suddenly the doorbell rang. William looked at his watch in surprise. It was still quite early for visitors. "I'll get it," he said to Emily. "In the meantime, you go get Michael for breakfast." When William opened the door, he saw two men in suits. "Mr. Goldsmith?" one of them asked. "We're from the Department of Social Services. May we come in?" William felt a chill run down his spine. "Of course," he said, letting them in. "How can I help you?" The men entered the living room and introduced themselves. One of them, the older one, began to speak. "Mr. Goldsmith, We have received a complaint about the conditions of the children in your home. Given the ongoing investigation into your activities and the volatile situation, we are compelled to conduct an inspection. William felt the ground slipping from under his feet. A complaint? From whom? There must be some mistake. The children are perfectly fine. At that moment, Emily and Michael entered the living room. When they saw the strangers, they froze. "Uncle William, what's going on?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. William tried to smile. "It's nothing, dear. These gentlemen just want to make sure you're okay." The younger of the men approached the children. "Hi, I'm John. And what are your names?" Emily and Michael timidly introduced themselves. "Tell me, are you having a good time here?" John asked. "Does Uncle William take good care of you?" Emily nodded firmly. "Yes, Uncle William is very good. He makes us breakfast, helps us with our homework, and even reads us stories before we go to bed." Michael added, "And he taught me how to play chess." William felt a warmth spread through his chest at these words, but the senior inspector remained unmoved. "That's good, but we still need to do a full inspection. Mr. Goldsmith, we'd like to see the house and talk to the children alone." William wanted to object, but realized it would only make things worse. He nodded. "Of course. Emily, Michael, please show the gentlemen to their rooms." When the children left with the younger inspector, the older one turned to William. "Mr. Goldsmith, you must realize that your current situation is a cause for concern. An investigation, a possible prosecution, is not a good environment for children." William felt anger rising in him. "I did what I thought was right. I took responsibility for my mistakes. Isn't that the example I should be setting for my children?" The inspector sighed. "I understand how you feel, Mr. Goldsmith, but it is our duty to provide the best possible conditions for the children, and if we decide that they will be better off elsewhere—" "No!" William exclaimed. "You can't take them away. They're all I have left." At that moment, the children returned with the second inspector. Emily was holding Michael's hand, and they both looked worried. "What's going on?" Emily asked. "Are you going to take us away?" The senior inspector sat down in front of the children. "We just want to make sure you're happy and safe here." "But we are happy here," Michael exclaimed. "We don't want to go anywhere." Emily hugged her brother and looked at the inspectors. "Please don't separate us from Uncle William. He is the only family we have left." William felt tears coming to his eyes. He went to the children and hugged them. "Don't worry. Everything will be fine. I won't let anyone take you away." The inspectors looked at each other. Finally, the older one said, "All right, Mr. Goldsmith. We will finish our inspection and submit a report. But I warn you, we will be monitoring the situation closely. If there are any problems—" "There won't be," William said firmly. When the inspectors left, William sank down on the couch, feeling completely exhausted. Emily and Michael sat down next to him. "Uncle William," Emily said quietly, "can we really stay with you?" William hugged the children. "Of course you can. I will do everything to make sure we stay together." But deep down, he knew it might not be that easy. Someone was clearly trying to hurt him, and now not only his company and reputation were at risk, but also the children who had become so dear to him. That evening, after the children were asleep, William sat in his office trying to figure out who might have filed a complaint with social services. Suddenly, it hit him. Robert Kingsley. He was the one who had threatened to use the children against him. William grabbed his phone and dialed his lawyer's number. "James, I need your help. We need to be prepared for any attempt to take away my custody of the children. And also, I want you to check all of Robert Kingsley's connections. I'm sure he's behind all this." After hanging up the phone, William went to the window. The city below shone with lights, as serene as ever. But for him, the world had changed forever. Now he had a family to protect, and he was ready to fight for it to the end. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he whispered, thinking of Emily and Michael sleeping peacefully in their beds. even if it means sacrificing everything else. With that thought in mind, William returned to his desk and began to draw up a plan that would protect not only his company, but most importantly, his new family. A gloomy fall morning greeted New York City with cold rain. William Goldsmith stood by his office window, watching the drops trickle down the glass. The last few weeks had been like an endless nightmare: investigations, the company's stock plummeting, constant pressure from the press. But worst of all, the constant fear for Emily and Michael. The office door opened and Richard Stone, his loyal CFO, walked in. "William, we have a problem," he said without preamble. Goldsmith turned, smiling tiredly. "When haven't we had problems lately, Richard?" "This is serious," Richard replied. Kingsley made his move. He filed a lawsuit against the company, accusing us of fraud and manipulation of financial statements. William felt the ground slipping away from under his feet. "But we have already disclosed all the information. We're cooperating with the investigation." "Yes, but Kingsley claims that this is just the tip of the iceberg. He says he has evidence of much more serious violations." William sank into his chair, feeling panic grip him. What evidence? We have nothing left. And then it hit him. He remembered an old project that only he and his late partner knew about, a project that could have destroyed everything. "Oh my God," he whispered. Had he found out about Project Phoenix? Richard looked at him in surprise. "Project Phoenix? I've never heard of it." William covered his face with his hands. "That was a long time ago, Richard. Before you came to the company, I did something I'm not proud of. Something that could have destroyed us all." At that moment, the phone rang. It was my secretary. "Mr. Goldsmith, there's a woman here who insists on seeing you. She says it's very important." William sighed. "I don't have time for—" "She says it's about Rebecca Foster." William froze. Rebecca Foster was a name he had been trying to forget. The woman he had refused to help, whose husband had died on his construction site. "All right," he said at last. "Let her come in." A few minutes later, a middle-aged woman entered the office. Her eyes were red with tears, but she was determined. "Mr. Goldsmith," she said, "my name is Lisa. I'm a friend of Rebecca Foster's." William felt his heart skip a beat. "What happened? Is Rebecca okay?" Lisa shook her head. "No, Mr. Goldsmith. Rebecca, she tried to kill herself last night. Her children, they're in the foster care system." William felt a wave of guilt wash over him. "Oh my God, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," Lisa said bitterly. "You refused to help her. You threw her out of the charity event, remember?" William closed his eyes as he thought back to that night. "I didn't come here to blame you, Mr. Goldsmith," Lisa continued. "I came because Rebecca came before. She said she had some information that might interest you. Something about a project called Phoenix." William jerked his head up. "What? Where did she—" "Her husband," Lisa explained. "Before he died, he told her about some documents he had found. Documents that could destroy your company." William felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Where are these documents now?" "Robert Kingsley has them," Lisa answered. "Rebecca sold them to him when she realized you wouldn't help her." William felt the ground slipping away from under his feet. Everything had fallen into place. Kingsley's sudden interest in his company and his confidence in his victory. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked Lisa. The woman looked him straight in the eye. "Because Rebecca believed, no matter what, that you were a good person deep down, and she wanted to give you a chance to make things right." When Lisa left, William sat still for a long time, trying to comprehend everything he had heard. He remembered Rebecca, her pleas for help, her children, and now she was in the hospital, and her children were in the foster care system, just as Emily and Michael could have ended up. Suddenly, the office door opened and Emily walked in. "Uncle William, you promised we would go to the park today." William looked at the girl and felt something breaking inside him. He walked over to Emily and hugged her tightly. "Of course, dear. We will definitely go. But first, Uncle has a very important thing to do." He went to the phone and dialed the number. "James, this is William Goldsmith. I need your help. We're going to the hospital." An hour later, William stood at Rebecca Foster's bedside. The woman was pale and exhausted, but her eyes opened when she saw him. "Mr. Goldsmith," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" William felt tears coming to his eyes. "I came to apologize, Mrs. Foster, and to do what I should have done a long time ago." He took out some papers from his pocket. "These are the documents for setting up a trust fund for your children. It will cover all your debts, provide for your children's education, and give you a fresh start." Rebecca looked at him with wide eyes. "Why now?" William smiled sadly. "Because I finally realized what it means to be a man and what it means to be a father." When he returned home, Emily and Michael were waiting for him in the living room. "Are we going to the park?" Michael asked hopefully. William sat down in front of the children. "We will definitely go. But first, I want to tell you something. I've done a lot of bad things in my life, things I'm not proud of. But now, I want to make things right. And I want you to be with me on this journey. Are you willing to give me a chance to be a better father to you?" William hugged his children tightly, feeling the warmth in his chest. He knew that there were still many challenges ahead. Kingsley still had the Project Phoenix documents. The company was still in jeopardy. But now he had a reason to fight, and he was ready to face any challenge for the sake of his new family. The wind blew the clouds over New York City as William Goldsmith climbed the courthouse steps. Today was the day he dreaded and looked forward to at the same time, the day that would decide the fate of Goldsmith Industries and himself. Emily and Michael were waiting for him at the entrance with Martha, the housekeeper. Seeing the children, William felt his heart sink. No matter what happened today, he knew he had to stay strong for their sake. "Uncle William!" Emily exclaimed, throwing her arms around his neck. William hugged the girl tightly. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you ready?" Michael nodded seriously. "We're with you, Uncle William, no matter what happens." William felt tears coming to his eyes. How had these children, who had recently been strangers to him, become the most important people in his life? Entering the courtroom, William saw Robert Kingsley sitting with a smug smile. Their eyes met and Kingsley winked at him. The trial began. The prosecutor presented the charges: fraud, manipulation of financial statements, violation of labor laws. But the worst was yet to come. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "we have evidence that Mr. Goldsmith was involved in a project codenamed Phoenix, which involved illegal land grabs and bribery of officials." A whisper passed through the room. William felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He knew this moment would come, but he still wasn't ready for it. The judge turned to William. "Mr. Goldsmith, do you have anything to say in your defense?" William slowly stood up. He looked at Emily and Michael, who were sitting in the front row, their eyes full of fear and hope. Then he looked at Kingsley, who was already preparing to celebrate his victory. "Your Honor," William began, his voice trembling but growing more confident with each word, "I will not deny the charges. Yes, I was involved in Project Phoenix. I did things I'm not proud of for profit and power." There were whispers of surprise in the room. Even Kingsley looked shocked. "But I'm not here today to make excuses," William continued. "I'm here to take full responsibility for my actions and try to make things right." He took a folder out of his pocket. "This is a full report of all the illegal actions I have ever taken as the head of Goldsmith Industries, including those that the prosecutor's office does not yet know about. I am ready to cooperate with the investigation and accept any punishment the court deems appropriate." The room erupted in cheers. Kingsley jumped up from his seat. "This is some kind of trick. He is trying to avoid responsibility." But William continued, ignoring the shouts. I also want to announce the creation of a compensation fund for all those who have suffered from my actions. All my personal assets will be transferred to this fund. He turned to Emily and Michael. I realize that the most important thing in life is not money or power. It's the people we love and the responsibility we have to them. I've let a lot of people down, but I don't want to let these kids down anymore who have entrusted me with their lives. When William finished his speech, the room fell silent. Even the judge looked shocked. After a long pause, the judge adjourned to consider new evidence. When William left the courtroom, Emily and Michael ran up to him. Uncle William, what happens now? Emily asked, her eyes full of tears. William sat down in front of the children. I don't know, sweetheart, but no matter what happens, know that I love you both more than anything in the world. At that moment, Robert Kingsley approached them. Bravo, Goldsmith. I didn't think you were capable of that. But you do realize that this is the end, don't you? You're going to lose everything. William looked calmly at his old enemy. No, Robert, I have already won the most important thing, and no one can take that away from me. When the court resumed, the judge announced his decision. William was sentenced to a suspended sentence and a substantial fine. He was removed from the management of Goldsmith Industries, but the company remained under the control of the board of directors, rather than being taken over by Kingsley. Leaving the courthouse, William felt strangely relieved. He had lost his empire, his wealth, but he had gained something much more valuable. Emily took his hand. Where do we go now, Uncle William? William smiled. Home, sweetheart. We are going home. A year later, William sat on a park bench watching Emily and Michael play on the playground. Their new home was much more modest than their former penthouse, but it was filled with love and laughter. William Goldsmith realized that he had finally found his true purpose. He was no longer a millionaire who despised orphans. He became a father who was ready to give up everything for his children, and that was the best thing that could have happened to him.